I'm going to talk a little bit about investment crowdfunding, why I call it investment crowdfunding as opposed, and why some people say there are 4 types of crowdfunding, and I say there are only 3. So the third type of crowdfunding is investment crowdfunding. And in investment crowdfunding, there is a security. Right? There is a legal security that is traded.
A security being a claim on the company's cash flows or whatever, be that debt security or equity.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So in that, right, there can be equity, there can be debt, there can be revenue share models, and then, we can get into convertible notes and some of those different forms of securities.
Podcast World, Cabin Studios. Welcome to another episode of The Value, the language of business for those of you seeking to build or invest in companies that are scalable and highly valuable. I'm your host, Kevin Valley, and today we are talking about crowdfunding. Now, this is a topic that has been near and dear to my heart for a few years now, especially as a Caribbean person, especially in a market where we need some more access to capital from the founder side, as well as there are many individuals, I would say working class individuals who would love to be able to have access to more investment opportunities in the Caribbean and whatnot. And to that extent, today we are speaking to one of Inc. magazine's top 19 global crowdfunding experts, a board member of the National Coalition for Community Capital, the Crowdfunding Professional Association, and SuperCrowd Inc., strategy consultant for Fund Black Founders, one of the biggest crowdfunding portals for Black entrepreneurs, as well as an accelerator developer for the Aseco Capital Fund, which focuses on Latina founders. All of this in the form of Mr. Bill Huston. Bill, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the opportunity to come on to talk about crowdfunding. I really appreciate this opportunity to get to speak to a global market. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yes, and you speak about global market, but I love that you focus a lot of your crowdfunding support efforts in the Black and Latino space. And I think we're going to get to that. But as we were talking about just before I hit record, Bill, in this show, I love to get a little bit of background on the guest, right? And when I look at your public profile, I don't really see much before 2014. So I had to dig a little deeper. And I came to learn that you and your son in 2007, 2008 had a local business called City Life Local Food. You bring food from local farmers to West Louisville and East Downtown. Of course, Bill lives in Louisville, Kentucky. We're not sure if he's from there. He'll let us know. But Bill, before I spoil your story, I would like you just to imagine if you're looking at a short film of your life before we get to 2014, where you started My Crowd Rocks, and that started the whole foray into crowdfunding, I imagine. Can you tell us what was it like for you growing up, and what really got us here to the point that we're having this conversation today?
Wow, you have really done some research. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll tell you, I grew up in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. I lived there almost all my life. I lived in a city just south in the northern part of Kentucky called Newport, Kentucky. Newport, Kentucky was an interesting place. But let me take one step back and tell you, because this will add a little context. I was born in 1964. So that means that I was 4 years old when Dr. King was killed.
Oh.
I was in the first grade 2 years after Dr. King was killed. So for probably many of the listeners, I come from a different place in time. And, I talk to my oldest son about this all the time. And, one of the things that was really interesting is that legalized segregation had really just ended when I was beginning the school and going to school. So even though it wasn't really legal anymore, a lot of the hearts and minds in people hadn't changed. So, I grew up in a city that was predominantly white, but I grew up in an area that was predominantly Black. And what's interesting is that you kind of knew your role, you kind of knew your place, and you just stayed there, and you really didn't make waves. Well, I went through school after I graduated from high school, so I'm going to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth here. So this is kind of funny. So a lot of people were going off to school, going off to university. Certainly I had scored well enough on tests to go. And I just didn't know what to do. And I kind of wanted out of my dad's house. So I joined the U.S. Army. And after joining the Army, it was a great experience for me. I became a medical lab specialist. I went to basic training 2 months. Then I went to AIT. This is where I always feel like my life really began to change and transform. So I went to work at the Presidio of San Francisco. And at the Presidio of San Francisco, I worked on a weekend shift in the lab. So I worked 32 hours over the weekend, and then I got the rest of the week off. When I went to City College of San Francisco, go Rams. I was working on my associate's degree in natural sciences. So I was taking a pretty heavy course load, science, chemistry, physics, biology. So one day I decided to kind of lighten my load a little bit, and I took a jazz history class. And in that jazz history class, the professor said that we're going to take this all the way back to its African roots. And I thought, wow, I didn't know jazz came from Africa. Wow. I was already surprised. So we would talk on the class, and there was this guy, and his name was Rick Bell. And he was from San Jose, California. And he would start talking about African history. And it was like he was speaking Mandarin to me, right? Like I had no idea what he was talking about. I had never heard any of the stuff that he was talking about. I didn't learn this in high school for sure. As I started to listen to him, I just became like enamored with this idea of African history, Black history in the U.S. and globally. And then one day I was in Oakland, California, which is only 13 miles from San Francisco across the bay. And while I was there, I picked up this little pamphlet, this really, really small pamphlet. And the pamphlet was called Black People and the U.S. Economy. And it was just a small pamphlet. I always try to really express there was not a ton of information in there, but they really got to the point. And that really kind of began to change my life. So after I got out of the military, I worked in the medical lab field for many, many years. And then to kind of fast forward to becoming an entrepreneur and looking at what that entrepreneurial opportunity looked like. And again, I want people to understand that in the 80s, you could not take your laptop because we didn't have laptops. So you couldn't take your laptop and sit down at your kitchen table and start a business. So entrepreneurship wasn't as popular then as it eventually became. So after moving to Louisville, Kentucky, I was working as a community organizer for an organization called the Community Farm Alliance. Community Farm Alliance was a nonprofit organization. So I joined the Community Farm Alliance, and I worked in the urban areas in what they call urban food deserts. Urban food deserts are places where there's little access to fresh local foods. Since I'm speaking to a global audience here, I will tell you that sometimes depending on what communities you live in the United States, it's not all that you see on television. Right? There's a different part to the U.S. There were very few grocery stores. The grocery stores didn't have high quality of food. When Big Tobacco left Kentucky, they left $1.75 billion in a fund to help small farmers transition out of tobacco and into other crops. So working with Community Farm Alliance, I worked very closely with those small local farmers to try to create markets in urban food deserts in West Louisville and East Downtown. And in that process, I ended up starting a business with my son called City Life Local Foods. We kind of designed this idea around using, just so people will laugh now, but at the time we were using email to actually send out a list of the food that was going to be available the next week for farmers. People would order their food via email. They would pay us, and we would actually deliver something we called a personalized local food basket. So there's something called CSAs where you buy from the farmer and the farmer gives you whatever it is that he gives you, right? And to me, that didn't make a lot of sense, right? Like I would never go to Kroger's and give somebody $100 and tell them to put whatever they wanted to in the bag. So we created the personalized local food baskets, and the business began to grow, and it was growing at a rate where we needed to access capital. Mm-hmm. So we went to our bank where we actually had our money, and we were unable to get a loan. Now, I understood because we were a relatively new business. So we ended up going to the city and asking the city for a loan. While we were there working with the city, they said, well, we'll write you into a grant to get some of that $1.75 billion. We didn't hear anything from them for a couple of months. And when the article came out in the paper, we didn't get any of the grant money. Yeah. So, we kind of went out of business, fizzled out. And then the Great Recession hit. So maybe they helped us. So then during the Great Recession, I had another opportunity to go back and work in Cincinnati. And that opportunity fell through. In that process, I was actually working at a factory during the Great Recession to kind of make ends meet. And I tell you those details because after the deal fell through in Cincinnati, I was sitting in a car and I was talking to a friend of mine. He said, Bill, I hear fear in your voice. And he said something that was at that moment so profound. He said, Bill, what God's got for you is what God's got for you. So the next day,
that gave me chills
I started
just now when
looking.
he said that. I wouldn't lie.
Man, that was profound. Yeah. It was absolutely profound. So the next day I started looking for another business opportunity, and I found HubSpot. I would get up at 4 a.m. in the mornings before I went to work at the factory, and I would actually go through their inbound marketing training program. I went through the program. I graduated from that, their little online program, and then we started another company, my son and I, called H2 Communications. Absolutely. Still a big fan of it. So we started H2 Communications in around 2011. And my son, he was a videographer, and I would actually do the marketing for people to shoot videos. So in the process, I received an email from the local community college to get into this entrepreneurship program. And I don't think the email was really even meant for me. I think it was meant for my son. But I ended up getting the email, getting into the program, and my son got into a program kind of at the same time called Community Action Partnership. And these kind of ran along this parallel track. And what was really interesting about that was that while I was in an entrepreneurship program, and it's going to be really important what this entrepreneurship program really did for me. And I say this all the time is it wasn't that I learned so much more about business, but we got 18 months of a mentorship, right? One-on-one mentoring with a business professional from Louisville after we graduated from the program, which was really powerful because I was able to not only get mentorship from people that I would have never gotten mentorship from, but I was also able to get into networks and communities that I would have never been able to get into. We actually shot video. One of our first clients was a venture organization called Venture Connectors. This demographically was very different than my son and I, because it was a bunch of old guys, right? Who looked at deals. We were able to pick up that deal because I was in that entrepreneurship program. One of my instructors actually was on the board there. So he got us the job shooting videos there. And I say that, and I always tell that story because there are two really important things that I find that a lot of times we think, well, my biggest problem is access to capital. But I think that having that real mentorship and having somebody to help me avoid all the landmines that they've already stepped on, and also having those networks, right, where people can recommend me for jobs, can recommend me to different people so I can meet other people. Those things are very, very important and should never be overlooked as we grow our businesses and thinking about the access to capital. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit here. So then what happened was my son was in that CAP program, and Rebecca Brenzel, I'll never forget, she was the head of CAP, and she comes to us and she says, there's this website called Kickstarter. And she said that with Kickstarter, if you shoot a really cool video, people will fund your business. So we shot 7 videos on a Saturday afternoon for everyone that was in CAP. And she put them up on Kickstarter, and we did not raise a penny. And I always tell that story for 2 reasons. One is because you have to be able to face adversity and come back from that adversity. And the other is because I just became engrossed in crowdfunding. because I started looking and studying this Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and I saw that, you know what? People are funding businesses. And why are they funding businesses? And from there, I came with this one fundamental rule of crowdfunding. I don't care if it's rewards crowdfunding, if it's investment crowdfunding. If you do not build an excited and engaged crowd, you will not get the funding you're looking for. That is the one fundamental rule that I found. So as I continue into the crowdfunding, I said, you know what? I think this is going to be good for me because the skill set required for crowdfunding is a skill set that I already have, number one. And number two is, what business is not going to need access to capital? So I started working on campaigns. And, like if somebody said they needed their Twitter done, somebody said they needed their Facebook done, this is before Facebook ads, right? I mean, literally, you are just doing this organically. I started working on these campaigns. I would work on campaigns for free. And as I got better and better at the campaigns and started having some success, then people started to hire me. And that got to be pretty good. And then Inc. magazine named me one of the top 19 global crowdfunding experts to know. I'm never really sure what that meant, but it sure was good for business.
I love it. I love it. So I think we just got to like 2014, because I think you won that award in 2014, right?
Yes, 2014. Right? Yeah, so from between 2012 and 2014, I did a lot of free work, really just learning the space.
Okay. And so you would say your work is more like, it sounds like you're a marketer. It sounds like you're a marketer, but you also have a passion for community, because in listening to that background story, I think you probably said it with community 7 times, maybe. Yes. Right. So it seems that community is really important to you. And it seems like that is the impetus that nexus that brings us into crowdfunding. Right. So you got that Inc. magazine recognition in 2014. I know you co-founded a company called My Crowd Rocks in March 2014. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Wow, this really takes me back. So actually, a guy who was in the next cohort of the entrepreneurship program, he was a web developer and graphic designer. We decided to start My Crowd Rocks to help businesses actually access crowdfunding through, now at the time, it was just called crowdfunding, but it was rewards crowdfunding because there was no investment crowdfunding. There was no Reg CF that had not passed yet. Right. So I started working in that space, and, I was able to do a lot of global crowdfunding campaigns. One campaign that I'll tell you about expressly that I was really proud of from a strategic perspective is there was a guy, an Indian gentleman, and he had created a board game for cricket. So, where I grew up, nobody plays cricket, right? I really never heard of cricket. And so I learned more about cricket than I'd ever thought I would in my life. But one of the things that was interesting is he lived in Boston. And what we did was we targeted people in countries where they played cricket with Facebook ads. Nice. And, so we really didn't get a lot of money from people in the U.S. because, they don't really play cricket. So we were able to use Facebook ads to target people in those countries and successfully crowdfund that campaign. Another part of the story that I left off was probably the first big opportunities that I had was working with a company called Crowdfund Russia. So for anybody out there who doesn't believe in the power of LinkedIn, I was in these LinkedIn groups and I would always make comments and engage with people. And I got a private message from this guy named Anthony who actually did crowdfunding in Russia. So we had a partnership for a couple of years where I would help Russian companies actually crowdfund. This was like before Zoom. I mean, we would use Google Hangouts for anyone who's old enough to remember those. And they didn't have all the bells and whistles that you have with Zoom. I remember this work being so difficult because one of the things that we did was Anthony, the guy in Russia who I worked with, he lived in Moscow. He spoke like 6 different languages. I only spoke English, and most of the people that I worked with only spoke Russian.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes a 30-minute call would take 2 hours because Anthony, he had to interpret from English to Russian, from Russian to English. But it was a great experience. It was a great learning experience. I did that as My Crowd Rocks, but that was the partnership that I actually worked with. And then moving into 2016, investment crowdfunding, regulation crowdfunding, Reg CF became legal finally on May 16th, 2016. And nothing was really going on. Yeah. there were not very many deals. I had the opportunity to fly out to Los Angeles and to speak on a panel about marketing and PR at the Crowd Invest Summit. At the time, they said it was the largest crowd investment summit. Again, I don't know what that meant. It was pretty big. It was really nice. It was really expensive. but that was a real turning point for me. That was a real turning point in my life for a couple of reasons. One is, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that I'm very close to Devin Thorpe and the Super Crowd. And that was the first time that I actually met Devin. Okay. Was in Los Angeles in 2017. And I met Linda P. Smith. She was the first Black woman to have a regulation crowdfunding platform. It's called By the Block.
Right. The real estate platform, right? Yeah.
So yes. So I started working with her as a consultant, and I would help people get their offering documents together, help them create marketing strategies around the crowdfunding. And that was really interesting work. It was really, really hard to grow. And I tell you, this is going to be one instance, and I'm going to give you a few examples of what the lack of access to capital looks like, right? People say it all the time, but this is what it looks like. In 2020, By the Block was one of the top 10 platforms for dollars raised. They raised over $1.5 million. And in 2021, they were gone. And the reason they were gone is because there was no venture funding, right? So I worked with Linda. I didn't necessarily work for Linda. I worked very closely with her. She would recommend me to people, and then I would work with those people. What was interesting is she never really had the capital to be able to hire people. She didn't have the capital to be able to upgrade the technology like some of the other platforms. And a really interesting campaign that I worked with as a consultant was with a woman named Ina Jones. And she had a company called Roots and Vines from the south side of Chicago. And I love to tell this story. You're going to get this, right? Because she was doing something very similar to what we did with City Life Local Food. We were unable to access capital, so our business kind of died on the vine. Pardon the pun there. She was able to go to her community, raise the capital that she needed directly from her community, and get her business off the ground started. She was able to get a space. And then she got some add-on funding from some nonprofits, foundations. And then she met a pastor, and the pastor actually gave her a second location. Today she has organized Black farmers in Illinois to get that food into the urban food deserts on the south side of Chicago. As you can tell, that story really let me know the power that investment crowdfunding could have, especially for Black-owned businesses, right? Because I experienced that. I experienced the lack of capital, the lack of access to capital. I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to have your business go out of business when you are successfully running your business, but you can no longer grow because you can't access capital. I experienced that with Linda at By the Block. I still from time to time communicate with Miss Jones because, that's something that's really powerful. And the reason community is so powerful to me, I told you I read that pamphlet about Black people in the U.S. economy. And one of the things that I understand is one reason that it's hard for us to access capital is because we're a very low wealth community in the United States, right? That doesn't mean that we don't make money. That doesn't mean that there aren't people with good jobs. That means that there aren't people with wealth, right? There are not people who are going to be able to say, hey, you know what? You want to buy a house? Here's the $20,000 for your down payment. Now all you have to do is pay for the house. Right. There are not people who are able to say, hey, I know you want to go to a really good school, so I'm going to be able to pay for it. And I don't think sometimes that people kind of understand the difference between wealth, right, and income. And, the amount of money that you make and the amount of money that you have and the amount of money that is kind of passed forward from generation to generation. And when I think about investment crowdfunding, one of the things that's really powerful to me is that not only are founders, real estate developers able to access capital for their businesses, but there's also a wealth building opportunity for the community through inclusive investing. And in the United States, that didn't exist for 80 years, right? After the stock market crash in 1929, legislators in their infinite wisdom saw that, we really shouldn't have regular people, working class people really shouldn't have the opportunity to invest in private companies because they're too risky. I say that a little bit sarcastically. Because they don't care if I go to the casino and gamble all my money away. They just don't want me to get duped by a.
But we get duped, but in the US, and I've spent some time in the US. In the US, you get duped by so many other systems, be it healthcare, listen, let me not go on, but there's so many systems out there that, let me not say duping you, right? But so many systems out there that they're set up for consumerism, set up to get the most out of your money. You know what I mean? So why not enable us, okay, if we want to invest in a business that we like, a business that we support. So if, instead of being a regular consumer, how about we also be an investor in that business?
Absolutely. And that opportunity really doesn't exist. And if you think about how the internet itself has really democratized business as we know it. Or business as I knew it, right? Because I came from a different place in time. And the people who determined what I read, they either worked for big publishing houses or they were particular newspapers, right? That had the money to actually, have a piece of that industry. And that's what I read. You and I, when I was coming up, we would have never had this opportunity to have this conversation, right? In this context, because if we weren't important enough to be on CBS News, we weren't going to have this conversation, right? And today, not only does the internet actually provide that democratization, but it's the backbone, obviously, of crowdfunding. And, it's online capital formation. And it, again, provides the democratization. We talk about that all the time at NC3 about community capital and the power of community capital. And having seen the power of community capital and been able to work with companies that actually were able to tap into and utilize that power. There was a company that came to me and they had already raised a significant amount of money and they were kind of at a stuck point and they wanted to know how they could move further, right? So I took a look at their marketing and started analyzing this. And they had 1,000 people who followed their LinkedIn page, but they never thought to reach out to the people who followed their LinkedIn page. Right. And, and just, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just, really thinking about that and that process and what that process is like. And I've had, I would say, for me, a unique opportunity to come from the rewards crowdfunding space into the investment space. Of course, I've had to upskill, right, to learn more about finances and compliance and those documents that I didn't have to really know about in rewards crowdfunding. And I've had the opportunity to work on many, many crowdfunding campaigns in many, many different industries. Can I give a shout out to Renee?
Renee King?
Renee King. Yeah, absolutely. Can I give her a shout out? Last year, we did her, Maisha Walker, Deborah, I forget Deborah's last name, as part of the Fun Black Founder team, Drew and Lauren Holiday Social Impact Fund. We did 45 Black-owned businesses, right? We took them through our crowdfunding accelerator and, raised well over $200,000 for those businesses. I mean, that's huge. And a lot of times it doesn't seem like a lot of money. But if you were in the situation where we were, if we had $30,000, we would have been able to grow our business, right? We didn't need $1 million. We didn't need $10 million. If we'd had $30,000, and a lot of times, crowdfunding gets you exactly where you need to be. But not only does crowdfunding get you the finances that you need, it helps you to market. It's Maisha Walker used to always say, it helps you to use that muscle, to exercise that muscle. It teaches you how to market, who to market to, how to talk the marketing talk, how to center, right, your investors when you talk to them, right? Nobody cares about what I want. Nobody cares about what I'm thinking about. They only care about what they want, what they're thinking about, and being able to tap into that and to understand that. And I tell people all the time that there is nothing that I would ask you to do as a crowdfunding consultant that would be bad for your business. Even if you never crowdfund, even if you never try to raise the capital, it's going to help your business. I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of rambling on stream of conscience.
I'm loving everything you're saying. Everything you're saying is so important. You're not babbling. I've been downloading, I've been taking notes from what you've been saying. And a few things I want to highlight here, all the way going back to that cricket crowdfunding campaign that you ran there. What I love about that is that, yes, cricket is not a sport that's widely known in the US, but it's heavily known in highly populous countries like India, Pakistan, New Zealand, Australia, throughout the Caribbean region or whatnot. And I think it was so interesting that you were able to crowdfund for that outside of the US. So I'd love to get to international crowdfunding later in this conversation. What I want to talk about, though, you alluded to it, is the difference between rewards crowdfunding versus investment crowdfunding. All right. So to somebody who is not really in tune in the crowdfunding space, may not necessarily know too much about it, they may not understand there's a difference. Like, what are all these types of crowdfunding? Some people might be like, hey, what is crowdfunding in the first place, right? Now, I know you have a great example that really drives this point home, or drives this delineation home. Using the Oculus Rift crowdfunding example, can you just walk us through the difference between rewards crowdfunding and investment crowdfunding?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Oculus Rift is really interesting, but I want to take this back a little bit further, and I want to talk about there are three types of crowdfunding, basically, in a very general sense. There's donation crowdfunding. A donation crowdfunding is just, the only thing that the person who donates money to that campaign gets is they get a good feeling to know that they did something to help someone or to help a cause. You think GoFundMe a lot, and that's good. That's really good. I think the only GoFundMe campaign I did was for a funeral for somebody that I knew really well. So I don't really operate in that space too much. But the rewards crowdfunding space, even though I talk about investment crowdfunding a lot today, that's where I started. Crowdfunding really came of age and really became a part of my life. And with rewards crowdfunding, in a very strict sense, it is donations. Because what you're doing is you are literally giving for something. But unlike just straight donations, you get something in return, right? But what you get in return is not a security. And I'll come back to that. So in the beginning of crowdfunding, around 2000, 2009, 2010, what you normally received was maybe a T-shirt, maybe a mug, something that had some value in letting people know that you had participated in this crowdfunding campaign. But, again, you didn't get a security. You weren't able to make any money from that. As rewards crowdfunding continued to evolve, what happened was a lot of people started to use crowdfunding to test the market, to test the product market fit. So let's say I had created this really nice iPhone case, right? I didn't have the money for it, but I did have an idea for it, maybe even had the specs. So what I would do is I would go up on, Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and I would actually raise the money in a pre-sale. And I would say to you, basically, if you give me the money today, in 6 months, I will provide you with the product. Now, that sounds kind of crazy and counterintuitive, but that has worked to the tune of about $26 billion globally, right? So it works. People do it. Kind of understanding the motivation for why people do it is really, really important. And that's a little bit more of the marketing. I'll just kind of put a pin in that. But understanding the motivation of why people invest, why people go through rewards crowdfunding is very important. But that's all you get, right? So when we talk about the Oculus Rift, they raised millions of dollars on Kickstarter, and people got some really cool goggles, right? I mean, like At that time, it was state of the art, right? State of the art. I guess it's not such a big deal. I got my son some, and I haven't seen him in like a year. So I don't even know what he does. I don't even know what he did with them. But the really interesting thing about that, and it's like the perfect story, is that so those people from Oculus Rift, who they were able to put in, I think it was like $2.4 million into the Oculus Rift. What happened was 2 years later, Meta, Facebook, came through and purchased them for $3 billion. So the founders of that company got $3 billion minus whatever debts they had. The people who built that company through their capital got to keep their really cool goggles.
That your son hasn't used in over a year.
That was it. That was it. And I think that's really a great story to tell you the difference between rewards crowdfunding and investment crowdfunding. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about investment crowdfunding, why I call it investment crowdfunding as opposed, and why some people say there are 4 types of crowdfunding, and I say there are only 3, right? So the third type of crowdfunding is investment crowdfunding. And in investment crowdfunding, there is a security, right? There is a legal security that is traded.
A security being a claim on the company's cash flows or whatever, be that debt security or equity.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So in that, right, there can be equity. There can be debt, there can be revenue share models, and then we can get into convertible notes and some of those different forms of securities. But there is a security. And the reason that's really important, so for instance, if you had purchased the Oculus Rift with a safe, right, then you just kind of had an IOU, right, that really wasn't worth anything, right? Because that's kind of what a safe is. But then when there was this equity event, which was an enormous equity event, right, you would have been able to cash out and had actually had that stock. Then you would have been on the same level with the founders, right? You would have had money from that. So probably you still would have had some really cool goggles. Because I'm sure they would have given that as a reward, but also you would have had a claim to some of the profit that company made when they were purchased, when they had their equity event. And that is such a powerful story. And that's why I think that investment crowdfunding is really, really powerful today, especially in communities that are low wealth communities. And a lot of times we forget to talk about this, but not only does it provide access to capital, but it provides the opportunity for wealth building through inclusive investing, right? So now you have the ability to get in on those deals before they go public, right? While those deals are still private, right? While you're buying Facebook stock for 30 cents as opposed to buying it for $300, right? Today, or $30 or $50 when it goes public, where you think about the amount of wealth created. If you had held Facebook at 30 cents and when it went public, you think about the amount of wealth that was created, with that one event. And that's why investment crowdfunding is so powerful and it can be such a powerful tool. And that's why I really love it and I really push for it. There's definitely a space still for rewards crowdfunding for really early stage companies who may have a concept. And there's a value to it. But if you have a company, especially a small business, if that small business has revenue, if you have customers, getting your customers to invest in a business, right? They're already parting with their money for your product or service, right? So think about what that looks like. If I'm a customer, and I have another story for you, I love to tell stories, right? So if you think about what that looks like, is that if I like going to your coffee shop and now I am sharing the revenue with you, how many cups of coffee do you think I'm going to drink a day? How many of my friends, neighbors, and family do you think I am going to tell to come to your coffee shop? According to Honeycomb Credit, which is a investment crowdfunding platform based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, companies that successfully crowdfund the following year increase their revenue on average by 60%. 60%. And that's because your investors become customers and brand ambassadors for your company. One of the raises that we did in 2020, we actually oversubscribed. So we were raising $250,000. We raised $268,000. And you can see that. You can go on WeFunder and I didn't make that up. But what you can't see is that year over year, we were able to increase sales by over 150% for that company. Because during that process, one of the things that we did is we would offer to the investors special offers, but they were also allowed to pass those special offers on to their friends and family. That's what I like to call the return on crowd.
I love it. And,
the return on crowd, obviously everybody knows and thinks about the return on investment, but that return on crowd is going to be a return on investment because you have your investors, you have your customers, you have your brand ambassadors all rolled into one. Kevin, this would be a great place to ask me a question, or I'm going to just keep going.
Thank you. All right. So I just want to go back really quick. I have this clarification question here, right? So you mentioned it's SAFE, right? And SAFE, for those of you who may not know, is called a simple agreement for future equity. Happens a lot in early stage funding in the US in particular, where just as Bill said, it's not necessarily you get equity. Now you have a promise note that says, okay, once we have some sort of event, some sort of a liquidity event, then you're going to receive equity at a valuation cap, lesser discount or what have you. And now in saying that, going back to the Oculus Rift example, would the $3 billion financing from Meta or the purchase from Meta would not count as an equity event to say, okay, if I purchase a safe and you tell me, all right, I invest at a valuation of 2.4 and you tell me that upon the equity event, you're going to get a discount of 20%. So you're going to get invested at a valuation of 2 million or whatever that works out to. And then if you receive 3 billion, then that's, you invested at a $2 million valuation and then boom, the company's worth $1 billion. That would happen for the safe holders, right?
Yes, that absolutely would have happened. And again, that's the perfect deal because I guarantee you, had they been raising, they would not have been raising a valuation of $3 billion. Guaranteed. They didn't have a valuation, but I guarantee it would have been below $5 million, exactly. Right? And absolutely. So you really cashed out there. You really would have done well, with that opportunity there.
So my next question would be, given everything you just said, and everything we both understand, I can tell we share this passion for crowdfunding. Maybe you're a little bit more passionate about it than I am. You know a lot more about it. I'm trying to engender it a lot more, especially in the Caribbean region. But my question to you is, why is there not more crowdfunding happening, especially given what you just described as the return on crowdfunding, the ability to invest in products within your community that you love, support businesses that you love? What is stopping more crowdfunding from happening? Is it the whole Jobs Act 2012, Title III, who's an accredited investor versus a not accredited investor? What is stopping this from really just exploding?
It's hard. It's hard. Crowdfunding is hard. It is not simple. There are a lot of moving parts. If I can do a shameless plug here, I'm actually a co-founder of a company called Raiseway. And our goal at Raiseway is to take the information that I know and that our other co-founder knows from our experience, actually taking people through this process and put that on a digital platform so that people can go through it in a very cost-effective way and also go through it at their own pace, right? Kind of a do-it-yourself platform. And the market that we're targeting are the sub 124 raises. 124 is the limit where capital gets, after $124,000 under Reg CF, capital gets a lot more expensive because you have to have a third party come in and review, not audit, but just simply do a review of your financials, even if you don't have
this financials. This is a FINRA third party, and this is you just have to find your own.
Well, yeah, you have to find your own. A third party CPA firm. That's cost significantly, right? Especially for a company that's a small business that's doing a sub 124 raise. So that's why we made the cutoff there, is because you as the owner or founder can just sign off on the financials and you don't have to have a third party review them. So with that being said, here in the United States, there are 33 million small businesses and 10 million of them in 2022, 10 million of them actually were looking for capital. and 0.0074% of them used crowdfunding.
You just have those numbers off the top of your head, or are you looking at something? Because I'm impressed.
I'm saying it off the top of my head because my co-founder, he really digs into data, and he gave me this, and we've talked about it so much, right? that I absolutely have it in my head now.
Full.
It's incredible when you think about that, right? All of those companies that needed to access capital, and none of them thought about, instead of going to the bank, turning their community into the bank, turning their customer base and vendors into the bank. They never thought about that, right? And that's an opportunity. And another thing that's hard, another part of crowdfunding that is hard is asking friends and family, right, to invest. Now, a lot of that is the way that you frame it, right? So I always tell people that, you don't say, hey, will you invest $100 in me? But you know what? I'm giving you the opportunity to invest $100 in ... right? So, a lot of it is in the way that you frame it. But crowdfunding is hard. It's just difficult. It can be very difficult. It can be very time consuming. I'll give you another statistic. The average person who learns about crowdfunding, right? We call it the discover crowdfunding phase. It is 14 to 18 months between that discover crowdfunding phase and the time that you actually start raising capital.
Start raising, not
right. Start raising capital. Actually start raising the capital. You go live, right? It's that long of a process. Now, the value proposition that I bring to founders is I'm able to reduce that to somewhere around 4 to 6 months between the time that you engage with me and the time that you start raising capital. Okay. Because I'm going to be able to cut through a lot of the things that you have to learn because I've had those experiences. We're going to be able to get right to the meat and potatoes of what it is that we need to do. But you still have to build that crowd, right? That fundamental rule never goes away. So it's still going to take you some time to engage that crowd. Even if you kind of have the crowd, you still have to get them warmed up, engaged. Sometimes you have to educate them about crowdfunding. And that's why it hasn't really exploded. The applications for crowdfunding are just enormous. With the Crowdfunding Professional Association, the president, Brian Christie, he is right now circulating a petition for football, American football, right? Which is, it's crazy huge, right? I mean, I love football. Like, I'm a big Cincinnati Bengals fan, even though the Bengals have not necessarily been a great franchise, but I'm still a big fan. What if the Bengals did a community round every year where they raised $5 million from their fans? Man, the applications, here in the U.S., we're in the midst of this silver tsunami where baby boomers are retiring from their businesses. And these businesses are already successful. They already have customer bases, but they don't necessarily have their children or grandchildren who want to get into those businesses. So these businesses are just disappearing. Imagine if a community was to go in and purchase those businesses, right, that already exist in their communities, and now they get an ownership stake in those businesses or some type of debt relationship to those businesses. So the applications for crowdfunding are enormous. We haven't even really talked about real estate. I'm working with a real estate developer who's focused on affordable housing right now. He's absolutely killing it. But even working with me, we have run into difficulties getting the offer up and ready to go. So it's hard, right? And I'll tell anybody that if you want to make the leap into crowdfunding, be prepared to do a lot of learning, some management, because there are a lot of moving parts. You're probably not going to be able to do them all yourself. So you're really going to need a team. That's the reason that crowdfunding has really not exploded. And then there aren't a lot of small dollar investors. I'm going to give one more quick shout out to the 10K project.
Tawana.
Tawana. Now, do you know where Tawana lives?
In Louisville, Kentucky, right? No?
Louisville, Kentucky. Right? We doing some crowdfunding in Louisville. Yeah. So the 10K project, of which I'm a member, not really an active member, but I'm a member of the 10K project. And, what they're doing is going to be very, very important as crowdfunding grows, especially in the Black community. But the 10K, their goal was to get 10,000 small dollar investors who were looking. They were already educated and they were doing due diligence and looking for businesses to invest in. And if you have 10,000 of those businesses and each person invests $100, you got $1 million, right? Probably a lot of businesses don't even need $1 million, right? But that's the whole goal behind the 10K project, which I think that's a huge idea. And I love the work that Tawana is doing. I actually co-created a course with them called The Road to Crowdfunding. But, what they do with the 10K project, I think is something that really needs to happen, that you have people educated, because a lot of people, and I found this out when I was working with Linda at By the Block, is a lot of people, especially in our community, have never invested. They really don't know anything about investing. And then I'm going to come to you and I'm going to say, hey, invest in my real estate deal, invest in my company. And they're just kind of looking at me like, huh? So that education piece is very necessary, both for issuers and also investors.
Nice, man. And yeah, shout out to Tawana and Talisha. I've actually
Louisville.
actually recently became a member of 10K Project, and I'm going to be working with them, working with their investors on how to value companies, especially for early stage investors. So looking forward to that. And we're probably going to have Tawana on the podcast, if she will, to talk about the 10K Project, because it's really noble what she's doing. Okay.
It's vital. It's vital. It is vital for the growth of investment crowdfunding.
Definitely. So, Bill, you've pioneered what we call the Crowdfit investment crowdfunding strategy. And through this, you've been able to successfully raise over 1.5 million, almost $2 million for underserved founders since 2020, especially 2020. We're talking about a pandemic year, all right? Could you explain what this Crowdfit investment crowdfunding strategy entails, and how does it differ from other crowdfunding approaches which tend to not work as well? Yeah.
So a lot of times when you think about the communities, right, when you think about underserved communities, a lot of the issues, some of them that we just talked about, right? People don't have a lot of money. People are not necessarily savvy investors. They don't really understand investing. They surely don't understand that if I give you $100 today, you're talking about giving me back $300, $500, 5 years from now, right? So that's a really hard sell. So with the Crowdfit, what we do is we really focus on and drill down into educating and engaging with your closest networks. Really drilling down into people who are going to support you, maybe not even your business, right? But they're going to support you, because if you're not able to get that initial push, able to get to that minimum goal in crowdfunding. So in rewards crowdfunding, there's kind of, all or nothing, right? With Kickstarter, some of the Indiegogo, it's kind of all or nothing. With investment crowdfunding, you set a minimum goal and you set a maximum goal. Now, sometimes that maximum goal, it's capped at 5 million, but that doesn't have to be your maximum goal. Unless you're willing to pay for a review, then you're probably going to set your initial maximum at 124, right? But you're going to set your minimum goal at a goal that you can actually reach. And that's going to come in. And I like to think about crowdfunding, investment crowdfunding, in 2 phases, right? This is speaking directly to the Crowdfit program, is hitting that minimum, right? You have to hit that minimum. And that minimum is going to be hit through your network. Primary, secondary, right, networks, right? So that's going to be me reaching out to you, Kevin, asking for an investment, right? Because you know me, I know you, there's a level of trust built there. And then that secondary network is going to be people that you know, Kevin, that I may not necessarily know, but they trust you. They know you and they trust you. So they're going to take a look at that campaign and really being able to energize and educate that primary and secondary network. That's where we focus with the Crowdfit program. Because if you're not going to get that money, if you're not going to get those investments, then all the Facebook ads in the world is not going to help you. And then the other part of that, and why we focus so hard on that, is because once you hit your minimum, then you can draw down some funds and you can change your marketing strategy. But initially, especially in low wealth communities, the only way I'm going to really be able to reach out to people is via email, via text messages. DMs, phone calls, and really educating people about investing, about what it is that you're doing, and not so much about the investment itself, right? Because people do business with people who they know, like, and trust. And these are people that you already know, like, and trust. I always give the example of I have a cousin who's done really well for himself. He's not necessarily a sophisticated investor, but if I ask him for an investment, he's going to invest in me. Right? He doesn't even care what I'm doing. He doesn't even want to hear that, right? But sure, he's going to make that investment. And those are the people that we really focus on in that Crowdfit strategy, is getting to that minimum. Because if you never reach the minimum, you don't have to worry about growing beyond the minimum. So that's the real focus of the Crowdfit strategy, is education, activation, and engagement of your closest networks.
So are there particular types of products and services that are more ideal for crowdfunding than others?
So if you could build a crowd, you can crowdfund anything. Right. So let me start there. Absolutely. There are. If I have a consumer facing product, that's going to make a lot of sense, right? Because I'm going to be able to provide people with access to the product for their investment. Some platforms that I've been able to raise capital for, we kind of do that two for one thing. And that is that I ask you for an investment, but also I give you access for a year or 6 months to the platform, right? So I am demonstrating traction on the platform while also collecting investment dollars. So, I think that platforms are really good. I think consumer facing products, and, where I really like to focus is the small business space. And within that small business space, you already have customers. You have people who are parting with their dollars already, and simply having the conversation with them, right? That whole Crowdfit conversation is really important. And that's where a lot of times small business owners, they don't think about having that conversation. It's like, hey, thank you for buying a cup of coffee. Have a great day. Obviously, if you're still there 6 months later, you're probably making money, right? So now you offer me the opportunity to make some money alongside you, right? Then I have a financial interest tied to that business. And again, that's where my real community focus comes in, is because not a single person that I know that owned a business, right? There were a few guys who owned a couple houses in real estate, but I didn't know anybody who owned a business. And when you look across the United States, especially in Black communities, one of the things that you find is if there are any Black businesses, then they're really not generating a lot of revenue, right? There's a really small percentage of them, but they're really not generating any revenue. Investment crowdfunding is an opportunity to really build wealth. When I think about wealth, when I talk about wealth, there are two types of wealth, in my opinion, right? One of them is obviously the individual wealth that I build myself. And then the other is that community wealth, having those businesses in my community. What does that look like in other communities, right? So if I want to buy a pair of shoes for my son to go back to school, then I have to travel 8-10 miles to a completely different part of the city in order to get some high quality shoes, right? Because there are no retail outlets that exist in the part of the city that I live in. There are no real outlets where I can get fresh, healthy food options. And a lot of those businesses that are small, they can handle those sub 124 raises. If I could tell a really quick story here, again, and I like to tell these stories because this really allows people to see what it looks like. So in 2018, I met with some guys and we were talking about creating an opportunity zone for real estate, an opportunity zone fund for real estate in West Louisville. And I felt pretty good because these were some pretty big hitters. And they said, well, hey, let's meet at a coffee shop in West Louisville. There ain't no coffee shops in West Louisville, man. What are you talking about?
What?
You mean McDonald's? You want to go to McDonald's? There are no coffee shops. So fast forward to working with Fun Black Founders. There's a coffee shop called Black Coffee. And,
I like that. That's cool.
It is huge, right? It's BLK Koffee,
Okay.
right? And they are wildly successful. Do they have great Colombian or Ethiopian coffee? I don't know. I don't care, right? I don't care what kind of coffee they have. But now there is a place where you can go and you can rub shoulders with other entrepreneurs. You can go and you can sit down and you can jump on the Wi-Fi. All of those places only existed east of Ninth Street, but now there's one west of Ninth Street. And so to get community support wasn't hard at all, right? Somebody just had to be willing to do it and then promote it and talk about it. Again, that is the power of crowdfunding. And that's why it's so important with any marketing, but it's so important to understand the motivation, right? Because I said I wanted a clean, safe place where I could go, potentially meet with clients, potentially do some work outside the house. And, Kevin, you may want Ethiopian coffee, right? So there are going to be two different reasons that we invest, right? So it's important that you understand that. But at the end of the day, we were both willing to invest in a coffee shop in our community. And I think that's what's really, really powerful.
I love that. I love the work that you're doing. I wish that everybody could just work with you so that they could get their crowdfunding campaigns going, so that people can invest in businesses that they support. There's this phrase that we use here in Trinidad where, all right, so for me, right, I'm somebody, if I like your product, for example, if it's a food product or whatnot, I'm just going to be going there every day. And people will be like, so Kevin, you have shares in that place or what? And it'd be great if I could say, yes, I do. As a matter of fact, it'd be great. Okay. So I want to go back to international crowdfunding now, crowdfunding outside of the US. All right. I love the cricket example, but I want to know how we can make this happen in a practical sense. How were you able to execute that in the non-US markets, as well as your thoughts? You may not have spent much time in the Caribbean, if any, but how do you think that crowdfunding could work in a market like the Caribbean region?
So interestingly enough, right, it could work in the Caribbean because you can legally use Reg CF in the Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands. You can legally use it in Puerto Rico. It could definitely work there. But to your question and to the substance of the question you're asking me, it's all about the compliance, right? So one of the things that Reg CF did was it solidified investment crowdfunding in the United States. There were all kinds of laws where you could raise capital from people who lived in Kentucky, in Louisville, under intra-state crowdfunding regulations. That existed while they were working on Reg CF. And maybe that works if you're doing a really small local raise. Maybe something like that works. So some of the suggestions that I would have coming from the experiences of Reg CF coming to market is if you could do it Caribbean wide, that would be absolutely great, right? Because you're not going from each jurisdiction trying to figure out, what works, what.
Unfortunately, we aren't set up like that, man. We have different regulators in the Eastern Caribbean, different regulators in Jamaica, different in Trinidad, Guyana, wherever. I wish it could just be region wide. I would get all the regulators in one room and just say, guys, can we just do one, please? But please continue.
Yeah. So, that would be the first thing that I would really look at. Personally, am a little skeptical of FINRA and the SEC's focus on investor safety. It's just hard for me to believe that's really what they're concerned with. I love
think, that. I see where you're going with that. I love it.
Yeah, I just find that hard. But there has to be a certain level of compliance and regulation. I think that Reg CF here is really over regulated. I don't think that it needs to be that regulated. And maybe if you're raising less than $1 million, less than $500,000, it doesn't really need to be that regulated. I think the fact that there are limits on the amount of money that I, as a non-accredited individual, can invest, I just don't think there need to be many more regulations besides that, yeah. Right? So I'm not going to lose everything, right? Like the most I can lose is like $2,500, right, per year. So, that would be something else that whatever particular place you're in the Caribbean, if you don't have Caribbean wide, looking at the regulations, because what happens with all those regulations is it drives up the cost of the capital to where it almost doesn't make sense to raise the capital. And the only people raising capital through crowdfunding are people who are desperate, who can't get it anywhere else. One of the things that I try to talk to people about here in the U.S. is, why did you come to me last? Why did you come to me after everything else was exhausted? If you already had clients, why didn't you go to them first? I mean, customers, why didn't you go to them first? And another thing is like, the technical assistance, the way it's set up here in the United States, the SBDC, Minority Business Development Corporations, they're all focused on a real 20th century model where you come in, we're going to sit down, we're going to work on this 40-page business plan. We're going to do all of these financials, and we're going to spend 6 months doing this. And then you're going to have this really beautiful document that you're going to take to the bank, and they're going to turn you down for a loan. Right. And I'm just like, why do that? Right. And one of the reasons that they do that is because they don't know about crowdfunding. They're not aware of crowdfunding. They're not aware of the power of crowdfunding. And the government's pretty much not aware of the power of crowdfunding. So those government organizations that provide the technical assistance, they can't teach what they don't know. So a colleague, Kathleen Minogue, Scott Batson at Crowdfund Better, they're working really hard to get into that market where they're able to literally teach those TAs, right, the technical assistants, about crowdfunding and look at that as a primary option. Look to your crowd first. And if you can't raise money from your crowd, I don't want to be harsh here, but I'm going to have to be. If you can't raise money from your crowd, how are you going to do business? Mm-hmm. If you can't raise money from these people, who's going to buy your products and services? Yeah. So some of the things that we talk about at Raiseway is, what does it look like to be able to go to financial institutions and maybe even other investors, larger investors, LPs, and say, listen, we were able to raise 40% of what we need through crowdfunding, right? We have 1,000 investors who invested in this. Is that not due diligence enough? Is that not due diligence enough for you to kick in some money here? Is that not enough for you to go to the bank and then get a loan? If you have 1,000 investors who have brought you $500,000, $250,000, is that not enough to get some additional capital? Those are some of the things that we're working on. And when you think about the Caribbean, being able to educate the banking system, venture capitalists, angels, for angels and venture capitalists, man, you can do a lot of their work for them, right? Because a company that's going to crowdfund is going to heavily de-risk your investment, right? Yep. Really getting the word out and educating people in the financial fields, getting them to understand that, the goal here is economic growth and economic development in our particular country. It's not that you get all the money or I get all the money, but if there are more businesses and there are more opportunities to invest, there's more opportunity to make money. If more people have jobs and money, then there's more opportunities to do better. And understand that this is a financial system that can work together, right? That for all the people who are unable to get venture capital, for all the people who are unable to get bank loans, why don't they take a look at crowdfunding, right? They may not be able to crowdfund either, but why not take a look at crowdfunding? So really getting that crowdfunding education out there, having people become aware of that, and having some of those financial institutions actually invest in training people about crowdfunding, how to use crowdfunding, investing in Raiseway. And and getting some free access, right? Getting some free access codes. I think that the essence of what we do at Raiseway, the essence of what I do, it doesn't change no matter what country it is, right? You still have to build a crowd. You still have to have a business plan. And when I say a business plan, that could be a canvas, right? A lean canvas. It doesn't have to be this enormous business plan, but you still have to understand what it is that you're doing, what your value proposition is. So most of what we do is not Reg CF compliant. Now, some of the things are, right? So we take you through a process where you have to fill out a Form C. So you may not have to fill out a Form C in the Caribbean, right? You may have something different. And I mean, it may not just be called something different. It may be a completely different document that asks for different information. But, building out your crowd, understanding who your target investors are, how do you reach them, where do you reach them? That's not going to change. Doesn't matter what country you're in, right? All those things are going to remain the same. So I don't think there are that many enormous differences in crowdfunding. Again, when you get down to things that are regulation driven and regulation specific, you will. But most of the basis for crowdfunding is going to be the same no matter where you are. The Caribbean, Africa, the US, it's going to be the same. And it's going to be the same fundamental rule, right? And that's being able to build an excited and engaged crowd. Period.
I love it, man. I love it. So when I build all my crowdfunding platforms in the Caribbean region, I'm definitely going to send folks your way just to make sure that their campaigns are solid and that you're able to guide them through that process. So we'd definitely love to send some of that business your way. Right now, I want to tip my hat to the Eastern Caribbean Securities and Regulatory Commission. I hope I didn't mess up that acronym. They're actually looking to pilot and test out a potential crowdfunding platform for the islands of the Eastern Caribbean. So that's like St. Lucia, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, Montserrat, and a few others. So I really want to shout them out for being the pioneers in the Caribbean region in that space. All right, Bill, so I probably have like one or two questions left for you before I let you go ahead and get back to your evening. My first question for you would be, when you look ahead, right, what do you see as the future of crowdfunding? How do you see it evolving over the next few years?
Oh, great question. So I'll answer this in levels, right? So I think there's going to be this bifurcation in the industry, which we're already starting to see here in the US, right? There are going to be those small businesses, the sub 124 raises. Hopefully we're going to get that number up to $250 million, where it's not heavily regulated. And then you're going to have, and you already do, and I say that because I think I work with that part of the market. You're going to have the guys raising $5 million. You're going to have the guys coming out of Y Combinator, and they're coming with money. They're coming with VC backing. They are pretty far down the road. They're kind of raising $5 million for a different reason, right? I mean, nobody's going to turn down $5 million, but they're looking for market product fit. They're looking for other things, right? Where at the bottom end of the market, people are looking for enough capital to grow their business, to expand their business. Maybe Black Coffee wants to open 2 more locations. And if they're able to raise, $500,000, $250,000, then they're going to be able to do that, right? So I think that the first part is going to be this bifurcation. I think that as people become more sophisticated, investors, and I'm talking about non-accredited investors here, right? As they become more sophisticated and get a better handle on this, I think they're going to start looking at other opportunities. They're going to start working with large real estate developers, right? And having a community round. So if you think about the gentrification that happens in the US, what could potentially happen is, because it's going to happen, right? I mean, there are no illusions for me here, right? It's going to happen. So if I do have to move, at least I can make a little money on the way out, doing community rounds. So anytime there are big developers, big projects that are happening in the community, make sure there's a community round where you set up a Reg CF and allow people in the community to invest, right? So that not only do they have the opportunity to invest and to build wealth, one of the things that Devin always says, after you make that first investment, it's not so hard. I think that communities are going to see the value of coming together and creating these non-accredited syndicates to buy real estate. I think they're going to start attacking the affordable housing program. Crisis here in the U.S. I think they're going to be able to look at buying some of those silver tsunamis. I think communities are going to be able to actually buy these commercial corridors, rehab them, and put businesses in there at the local level. So I think that there are many innovative uses for investment crowdfunding that we have not even thought about. One of the innovations that one of the lawyers at NC3 has made is what they call the Diversified Community Investment Fund, which allows you to use Reg CF to actually create a fund. And, 60% of that fund has to be deployed into real estate. 40% of that fund can be deployed as you see fit into businesses or whatever. So I think as we see new models, new innovation coming to the table, and people understanding that they can make those investments and they can make a return. I think that if you're not making money on your investments, especially non-accredited investors, are not going to have money to invest, right? So if you're able to make money, you're able to keep that pool going and you're able to see larger and larger community-based impact.
All right, Bill. Is there anything that we have not covered this evening? I'm giving you open mic, open forum, open platform. Say anything that you want to get into the audience that we haven't touched on yet. Floor is yours.
Not really. That could be dangerous for me. If we had done this in the morning, that could have been a really dangerous thing. But no, I think that people should get educated about investment crowdfunding, educated about the opportunity, that they should get educated about business and how business works. And everybody's not an entrepreneur. But in the era of investment crowdfunding, everybody who has a job can be an investor.
I love it.
Right. That's the thing that I would want to drive home is that, everybody's not going to be a real estate developer. Everybody's not going to be a founder, but everybody can be an investor and everybody can build wealth.
Podcast world, there you have it. Getting funding from the crowd with Bill Huston. Subscribe to The Value at thevalue.show/subscribe. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you listen or watch your podcasts. And with that, Bill.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't worry. A lot of people miss that cue as well. All right. Podcast world, Cabin Studios. We are out.